lesson 8, let's talk about measuring all this stuff. So, first off, you're probably going, even though the rankings move a lot on an hourly basis, the rankings change. It's going to be hard to tell whether or not the pages you've created are improving unless you do some rank tracking. So if you have a rank tracking tool that's going to track whether or not where you are in search, whether you're 1 to 10, because the search results start at the top as 1, 10 being the bottom usually. And then the good ones will actually track whether or not you've appeared in a rich snippet, or whether or not you've got additional stuff like an image that's appeared in that result for the target keyword. You can also get started. I've added a link to this DIY Google Sheets report that kind of gives you a heads up on how you could improve pages that are getting organic traffic but don't get the click-through rate that they probably should from search results. So that way you can take a look at the meta titles and descriptions and maybe improve. And then I have an additional link that, mind you, you need to have a paid plugin in Google Sheets to make it work, but one where you could actually plug in URLs that you are working on to see how they're performing. Then it pulls dynamically from Google Analytics and Google Search Console, so look for that in the resources too. Ultimately, you should be measuring your rank and your organic traffic to those landing pages, or your organic traffic in general from a keyword set, and the time on page. So you should look at the organic search rankings per keyword for both desktop and mobile, your click-through rate from search, how many visits your landing pages are getting from organic search. Most of the data is from your Google Analytics account or whatever web analytics you're using. Your time on page, your bounce rate to the page, potentially back to search because that's a negative factor, and how things are converting when they come in from organic search. So just an FYI about bounce rate. So I think people think bounce rate measures one thing, but this is one of those moments where if you haven't set up Google Analytics correctly, it kind of measures something else. So if you've set it up properly, what bounce rate is as Avinash Kaushik, who's the Google Analytics evangelist for Google, says, I came, I puked, I left. So I came into your website, I hated it, I left. If people come into your website from Google search and they bounce back in high numbers, that's a negative factor, which is the whole reason why you have to look at bounce rate at some point. Because if your page was ranking and then it starts sinking in the rankings, this might be one of the reasons why it's sinking in the rankings. By default in Google Analytics, it will measure the number of single page visits. So that's what it's measuring. It's a visitor who hits one page and does not visit any of your other pages on your site. So where it can get a little wonky is if for some reason your Google Analytics tracking isn't firing, then it could potentially look like a single page visit. Or I had a government client, where one of their web pages, the whole purpose of the web page was to send somebody off to another government website. So you come into the government website and then you click on a link, and next thing you know, you're on a completely different website. Well, unless you code those links with additional Google Analytics tracking and said this is an event that I wanted to have happen, that looks like people left in a negative way, when in fact it was positive. That's what we wanted people to do. So there's a couple of things that would skew your bounce rate. So it's important for you to get a little bit educated about Google Analytics and how they envision bounce rate. But ultimately, you should be tracking this with a segment. So you're only looking at organic search traffic coming in and whether or not they bounce. So I've sort of walked through the whole caveat. So when you're looking at bounce rate, you want to make sure is that the intended keywords. Oftentimes landing pages rank for a wide variety of keywords. Once you know that it's not a tracking issue and you have a true bounce rate problem, it could be because somebody bounces because the page is ranking for something it shouldn't rank for. You could also segment your data. It's always important to segment your data, but take a look at desktop versus mobile, because maybe that's a difference. Maybe the page loads real slow in other countries and you have an international audience, and maybe that's the reason. So you can segment based on country and take a look at the data. If you've done all of that and you still have a high bounce rate, you have to take a look at the actual page. Are there things in the page that are causing the bounce? Is something confusing? And the other thing that happens sometimes is you haven't given the user anywhere else to go. So they bounce because there's nothing else to do. So maybe you want to take a look at the page and think about where else you want them to go on your website to keep them. So there's a couple tools at your disposal that you can use to measure your content success. So Google Search Console, but you just need to know how that data is being generated. And it won't show you the ranking zero, the rich snippet piece, but free, and you have access to it. Also, you can take a look at ranking tools. Those will show the ranking zero. I've given you links to a couple that I think are good ranking tools. And then your web analytics, whether you're using Adobe or free Google Analytics or paid Google Analytics. Okay, so we've covered what metrics you should use in order to see whether or not your content's working. I've given you both paid and DIY spreadsheets and tools to get you started. And we've talked about how you can overall measure your content effectiveness via organic search. Also paying attention to the click-through rate from your organic search results, the bounce rate, and the time on page. Okay, so here's a moment for you to take some notes for your journal. Were there any pieces that seemed important? Write down any to-dos you might have, any questions you might have after this session that you want me to answer. So, throughout this entire module, you've learned Google's rules for content, where to place the keywords, your supportive keywords, how to handle links. You've learned how to write meta titles and descriptions, and if you're in coaching with me, we'll go through how to practice writing meta titles and descriptions. We've talked about how to optimize content that isn't a web page, how to organize this keyword data, find your optimization opportunities and create a writing plan, and how to measure your content optimization efforts.